We hope you enjoy today's story. When I discovered that my wife had cheated on me twice and was planning to do it again, I was completely devastated. I conducted research on the emotional experiences that individuals may undergo when they realize that the marriage they previously believed to be strong and reliable has, in fact, deteriorated. The emotions that were identified as being particularly prevalent in such circumstances are outlined below. The dissolution of my marriage was akin to the devastation wrought by Hurricane Katrina, which flooded New Orleans. The metaphoric dam that had protected my identity and sense of self was breached, and the resulting floodwaters swept away everything that I was and everything that was my wife. I was overwhelmed with a profound sense of loss and despair. As the initial shock subsided, I was left with a marriage that had been stripped of its fundamental elements: trust, respect, admiration, and care. The emotional devastation was so profound that it seemed as if the very fabric of the marriage had been destroyed. There was no longer any trust, respect, admiration, or care. The photos of the aftermath of a hurricane are a stark visual representation of this emotional state. There is no recognizable place or structure left, and it is clear that rebuilding is not an option. The emotional pain and overwhelming sense of loss are so intense that it is tempting to simply give up and leave. There was nothing left to salvage. My wife had effectively destroyed our marriage, reducing it to a state of disrepair. It was as if she had taken our life and twisted it until everything turned into a pile of unrecognizable garbage. It was all over. Susie and I had a fight, which was not an unusual occurrence for most married couples. However, this particular fight ended very badly. Susie attempted to convince me to renovate our living room, stating that the furniture was outdated and that she wanted to redo the room and change the atmosphere. She asserted that the furniture was outdated and expressed a desire to renovate the room and alter the atmosphere. I elucidated the matter as clearly as possible, noting that the furniture was not old but rather a recent acquisition, and that I was not inclined to expend a significant sum on new furniture. She reiterated her desire for something new, prompting me to question my decision. I further exacerbated the situation when I stated, "I guess I'm tired of you too." She responded with a sarcastic remark, "Well, maybe I should go sleep with someone else then. Maybe you'd realize what you had and what you could lose." I did not allow her to continue. I responded by stating that she should determine her own desires and pursue them, but I would not be waiting for her when she returned. She had touched on a sensitive topic when she suggested that perhaps I should have married Phil instead of her. I was incensed by the implication that I was as unscrupulous as he was. I was so enraged that I yelled at her. I advised her to cease contacting me and suggested she pursue a relationship with him. I also informed her that I would not be purchasing new furniture, regardless of her actions or statements. I then proceeded to leave the residence and visit a local club for a few beers. I was enraged and required time to cool down before speaking with her again. Phil had always been my primary competitor. He was regarded as the golden boy in our community. Everything he touched turned to gold, with the exception of one particular instance. Years ago, he had his sights set on my wife. However, she was already in a relationship with me and therefore did not reciprocate his feelings. Despite this, he continued to pursue her, and he nearly succeeded in winning her over. Ultimately, though, she chose to remain with me. I worked hard at my job and was able to earn a very respectable income. In fact, the profitability of a project was not the sole criterion by which Phil judged its merits. I had been engaged in business for a considerable number of years and had gained a reputation for reliability and integrity. However, Phil was able to assume the role of the trustworthy, authoritative figure without having to prove anything about himself. I did not envy his success. I was raised to adhere to the principles of hard work, honesty, and reliability. Consequently, I would never envy another person's success. However, I was somewhat sensitive to the idea of success. For example, I recall feeling a sense of envy when I learned that Sue had dated him and that he had pursued her. It was approximately 2 hours later, around 9 p.m., when my mobile phone rang. I checked the number, which was my home phone. I opted to redirect the call to voicemail rather than engage in immediate conversation with my wife, as I was still experiencing elevated stress levels and had consumed a few alcoholic beverages. I anticipated that my emotional state might lead me to say something regrettable. At a later point in time, I listened to her voicemail message. It read, "Larry, I called to express my regret for what I said earlier. I recognize that this may not be sufficient for. I am contacting you because I believe you have seen that it is me calling, as you will not be home soon. I intend to go out for a while on my own. I will see you later." I felt that my previous message was insufficient. I had just started to calm down after our argument, but now I was angry again. I consumed another beer and then proceeded to search for her. I surveyed the parking lots of the local bars, but I did not observe her vehicle. I then considered the possibility that she might have departed with an acquaintance. Consequently, I proceeded to her best friend Patty's residence. As anticipated, her vehicle was situated in front of the house. I approached the front door and knocked. Approximately 1 minute later, Dave, Patty's husband, arrived at the door and inquired about my well-being. I responded, "How are you doing, Larry?" Susie and Dave had a minor disagreement earlier today. They decided to engage in a series of social activities, which included visiting multiple bars in the area. However, Dave was unable to locate Susie's vehicle at the bars, leading him to believe that she might have accompanied Patty. Therefore, he requested Patty's assistance in identifying the vehicle in question. It is believed that Susie and Patty were initially planning to commence their evening at the Bachelor's, but subsequently decided to return to Dave's residence. He continued, "I proceeded to the bar and observed that Patty's excursion was indeed present in the parking lot. I contemplated directly confronting Susie, but I was still somewhat inebriated from the beer I had consumed and believed it might be more prudent to wait until I had sobered up before engaging in further alcohol consumption." Approximately 15 minutes later, it was 11:15. They exited the premises and entered Patty's vehicle, which subsequently departed the parking lot. I followed at a safe distance, as Dave had indicated that they proceeded to the downhill bar, where they proceeded to consume beverages. I then returned to the parking lot to await their return. At precisely midnight, they departed for the next establishment, as I had anticipated. I surmised that this would be the final destination before their return journey. It was a pub situated within a hotel. At the stroke of midnight, Patty exited the hotel and entered her vehicle, which then departed. I was perplexed. Had I misjudged Susie's actions? Was she intending to engage in some misguided behavior? I was compelled to ascertain the truth. I procured a baseball cap and a t-shirt from my own wardrobe, intending to blend in with the crowd. I retrieved a shirt from my team from the trunk of the car and donned it for a disguise. I was not yet completely sober, so my disguise was imperfect. My name was on the shirt, but I did not believe anyone would pay much attention to it, so I deemed it preferable to no disguise at all. A few minutes later, I surreptitiously entered the pub and found a secluded spot where I could observe the situation. That is when I saw Susie with Phil. I observed that Phil was situated at a table positioned against the rear wall of the bar, situated at a considerable distance from the entrance. I noted that an unoccupied booth was located directly behind Susie, and I proceeded to make my way to that location in a surreptitious manner. However, I was not compelled to exercise caution, as the individuals in question were so engrossed in their discourse that they would not have been aware of my presence had I materialized in the vicinity. I was able to discern the entirety of their conversation, with the exception of, on 2 occasions, he leaned in to kiss her and whisper something inaudible. He thanked her for coming and said, "Not a problem at all. You know, I find it amusing when you and Larry have disagreements. It's one of those rare occasions when you let me feel closer to you." He continued, "Back when you two separated 7 years ago, I had the chance to be intimate with you for a while and twice even after. You got married. If you'd like, I'd be more than willing to share that connection again tonight as a form of repayment. I sometimes wish you both had more disagreements, just for those moments." She said, "You know, I love him to death, but when he pisses me off like today, I can't help it. I need revenge sex just so he's not the winner." As I listened to this conversation, I realized that she had cheated on me twice in the last 6 years of our marriage. The knowledge that my wife had cheated on me twice in the last 6 years of our marriage, and that she was planning to do so again that night, prompted me to revisit the narrative I had begun. Despite her professed love for me, her actions belied this claim. She had slept with Phil in an attempt to retaliate against me and prevent me from winning, as she had put it. This act, which I perceived as selfish and indifferent, had precipitated the changes I had previously mentioned. Whether or not this interpretation was justified, that conversation, it was a devastating experience that destroyed my love for her. I am not foolish to acknowledge this reality. I knew I no longer loved her, and I experienced a profound sense of loss. I was initially overwhelmed with emotion, but I soon realized that the situation had already reached its conclusion. I waited for some time, wondering how long it would be before they headed to the room. I heard him say, "Susie, are you ready to do it again?" I could almost see the smirk on her face. I knew she would be there because I had heard the words she had spoken. She always exhibited a smirk when uttering these words. I am ready to please you in bed until you feel ready and you can pleasure me. She then smiled. I might even take him home and let Larry lick the rest of your juice tonight. He'll be so drunk he won't even know the difference. Phil became visibly agitated at this remark. He regarded her with disdain, considering her words to be particularly distasteful. He would never want Larry to pay attention to his leftovers. Fortunately for them, they got up and headed to the I was prepared to inflict severe physical harm upon them. I followed them to the lobby, unable to discern which floor they had stopped at. I approached the porter and requested that he contact Phil's room. He terminated the call. I asked him to call Phil's room again. When he answered, I informed him that I believed the room number was 312. I asked him to confirm that the room number was, in fact, 312. The phone rang 3 times before he responded. I picked up the phone and asked in a muffled voice, "Is this room 312? He replied, "No, this is not 312. Why are you calling this number at this time? This is not room 312. It's room 422. If you call here again, I'll ask the manager to call the police." His wife inquired as to who was more culpable. I proceeded to the 4th floor via the elevator and traversed the hallway to room 422. I listened at the door until I discerned that the occupants were engaged in a sexual act. I then knocked on the door. I heard him shout, "What the hell?" I was gratified by this, as I was aware that I was about to disrupt his underserved party. I stepped away from the peephole so that he could not see. When he opened the door, I thrust my body into it with such force that the safety chain I then proceeded to forcefully dislodge the door jamb from its position, resulting in the door opening abruptly. My wife, who was previously engaged in an illicit sexual act with another individual, was discovered in a state of undress on the bed. Her sudden exposure caused her to vocalize a scream, her complexion rapidly assuming a pallid hue. I was somewhat astonished that she did not succumb to a loss of consciousness. My brother-in-law, Larry, was promptly alerted to the situation and ordered to vacate the premises. I then proceeded to verbally reprimand him for his unscrupulous actions, reiterating my previous admonition about the impropriety of his conduct. I then proceeded to strike him with a single, I struck him in the solar plexus, rendering him incapacitated for several minutes. I was no longer troubled by him. "Susie, you are a deceitful individual. I have overheard your conversation at the bar, and I am aware of your actions. It would be unwise for you to return home tonight. I will not tolerate your infidelity. I love you. Do not make the second biggest mistake of your life by returning home. It will not end well for you. You may perceive this as a threat, but I assure you it is not." I turned and walked out the door, genuinely surprised at my composure. Minutes earlier I was consumed by rage. However, delivering just one blow to that foolish individual demonstrated remarkable restraint on my part. I acknowledge that I was rather harsh with my words, but circumstances could have been far more dire. Upon reaching my vehicle, I sat inside and remained there for some time, attempting to calm down further. I elected to wait a few minutes to ascertain whether the police would arrive or if Susie would depart with Phil. Approximately 15 minutes later, Phil vacated the premises, entered his vehicle, and departed. A short time later, Patty reappeared, and Susie emerged and entered her vehicle. I was gratified that they did not linger in the hotel room to engage in further altercations after I departed. While the damage had already been done, their continued presence would have only exacerbated the situation. That prompted me to consider an alternative course of action, which I pursued by retiring for the evening. I am uncertain as to the precise time the telephone rang, but the caller ID indicated it was Patty. I am aware of your distress regarding Susie and your reluctance to allow her to return home. However, I wish to contact you to inform you that she is residing with us and Dave, thus alleviating your concerns. Patty, I was not intending to concern myself with her further. My feelings towards her have dissipated. I am unsure of the time, but it is approximately 3 a.m. It is 00 in the morning, Larry. It is evident that you are not concerned about the situation. I am aware that you have a strong affection for Susie, and she has a similar attachment to you. She is currently in your presence, expressing profound remorse for her actions last night. She is seeking your forgiveness and permission to return to your residence. Patty, it is evident that Susie's actions were not as prudent as they could have been. It would be prudent to ascertain whether her actions align with those of the other individual. Patty was informed that Susie had engaged in sexual intercourse with Phil on 2 occasions prior to the evening in question. Patty expressed disbelief, indicating that she was unaware of the previous incident involving Susie and Phil. It was also revealed that Patty had consumed alcohol earlier in the evening and was therefore less affected by the subsequent hangover than she might otherwise have been. Despite the fatigue induced by the alcohol, Patty was able to remain awake until approximately 8 a.m. By 10 o'clock the following morning, I was prepared to engage in a confrontation with Susie. I contacted Patty at her residence and informed her that Susie was welcome to return home if she wished to do so. I waited in the driveway when she arrived a few minutes later, accompanied by Dave and Patty. It was evident that their presence was intended to ensure that I would not cause her any physical harm. When Susie exited her vehicle, her eyes were wide open, and she inquired of Larry as to the meaning of the commotion in the front yard. "This is the entirety of the evidence that you have of me. It is comprised of all the gifts I have given you and all the gifts you have given me. It is also comprised of all the photographs from the period of our courtship and our 6 years of marriage. I am unable to think of a single item remaining in the house that would serve as a reminder of me. I have even removed the old furniture so that you may take whatever you wish. I proceeded to purchase new items in accordance with your expressed desire. Furthermore, I retrieved our wedding photograph and, accompanied by my wife, relocated it to a position adjacent to my chair. I then traversed the distance to the driveway, where I ignited a lit match in the gasoline trail I had previously prepared. As the flames rapidly consumed the pile of memorabilia, I observed the rapid spread of the fire towards the aforementioned items. In a relatively short period of time, the entire structure was engulfed in flames, creating a raging bonfire. The remaining debris consisted of ashes and burnt furniture frames. I turned to my wife, who was visibly distraught, and stated, "You have won, Susie. I heard you tell Phil that you never wanted me to win. I hope this was worth it, as it seems our marriage is over. I want nothing else from you. From this marriage, I hope to erase all memories of you. I will provide further details to my lawyer shortly." I heard the sound of approaching sirens from the other side of the street and saw a police car pull up. 2 officers approached to inquire about the situation. A few minutes later, the fire department arrived to extinguish the remaining flames. The gasoline had effectively incinerated the remaining structure, reducing it to a pile of ashes and charred gravel in a matter of moments. I was merely extinguishing the remnants of a marriage. I extend my sincerest apologies for any inconvenience or distress I may have caused. It is worth noting that I was subsequently arrested as I was escorted into the patrol car. I observed Susie crying. I was detained for a couple of days. I was incarcerated for several days, during which time a psychiatrist evaluated my mental state. The assessment concluded that I was of sound mind but experiencing distress and desolation. However, it is probable that I would have been released earlier had the authorities wished to do so. They evidently wished to observe me for a few days to confirm their initial assessment. I posted bail and retrieved my vehicle from the parking lot near my office. I had accumulated a number of personal items in the vehicle, including clothing and other miscellaneous objects. I proceeded to the nearest motel and secured a room for a few days until I could identify an appropriate apartment for rental. Several weeks later, I had become fully settled and was able to resume my daily activities. My court case commenced, and I entered a guilty plea to all charges, resulting in a financial penalty of $5. The financial penalty for ending my marriage was insignificant in comparison to the emotional distress I was experiencing. Susie contested the divorce and continued leaving me voicemails on my mobile phone, imploring me to communicate with her and forgive her. She asserted that the dissolution of our marriage was meaningless to her and that she wanted to reconcile. I left one message on our home phone when I knew she would be at work. I told her, "Susie, you say this dissolution of marriage was meaningless to you, but it was meaningful to me. Do you understand that it was meaningful to me?" I subsequently received no further communication from her. The divorce was granted, and I provided her with everything she had requested. My sole objective was to bring the marriage to a conclusion. Phil's wife became aware of these events and subsequently divorced him, securing a substantial financial settlement. It would appear that Susie was not the only wife who sought to exacerbate tensions with their husbands. A couple of weeks after I forced my way into the hotel room and discovered him with his wife, I encountered Phil at the same bar. His surprise was evident, as he had no opportunity to rise and flee. I rested my weight on his shoulder as he sat on the bar stool and stated, "I am nearly certain that if he continues to roam the streets, He will eventually be involved in a serious accident once his divorce is finalized. He began liquidating the remaining assets in his possession, and it became apparent that his absence from the town was noted by few individuals. Interestingly, not many people expressed regret at his departure. I privately hoped that he would remain in the town. I occasionally encounter Susie on the streets, and on each occasion, she expresses her regret and requests that I contact her for a conversation. I simply acknowledge her and proceed on my way. To this date, I have not contacted her, but she persists in her inquiries. Perhaps at some point in the future, I will initiate communication. I extend my gratitude to you for your attention and for listening until the end. If you found this account engaging, I invite you to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment.